Right. This is going to be part 2 of exchange rates that I said. So on the previous video, what we did is we looked at why exchange rates might go up and down, and we said that basically it's just determined by the supply and demand for sterling on foreign exchange markets. So what we're going to talk about now is, well, what happens if the exchange rate suddenly rises or falls. So let's take a sharp drop in the exchange rate, a depreciation, and for the sake of argument, let's look at the pound. So when the pound depreciates, we're going from something like, £1 equals 1.6 euros to £1 equals 1.3 euros. £1 equals $1.2. Sorry, £1 equals $2 to £1 equals $1.5. Yeah? So you're getting less of foreign currency for your pound, or looking at it the other way, to buy a pound costs you less foreign currency. So we can analyse the effects of this at both a macro and a micro level. So let's have a look at a macro level. Let's look at the economy as a whole. So first, the first most obvious thing that's going to happen is that exports effectively become cheaper. So it's not that the sterling price is going down. It's not that the price in pounds goes down. Sam is still charging the same amount for Dover-Brooks. It's just that to acquire, Dover-Brooks. To acquire a UK university education, it requires less foreign currency than it used to do. So the price of exports goes down in foreign currency terms, and as a result we're going to sell more exports and make more money from them. But at the same time, it's costing you more money to go to Disneyland. Disneyland stays the same price as it did before, but to get in, because you're getting fewer dollars or fewer euros for your pound, to get in is costing you more pounds to do that. And the same will also apply for things like oil. Oil is priced in dollars, so if you're getting fewer dollars per pound, then it's going to cost you more pounds to buy this oil. So the price of imports goes up, therefore presumably other things being equal, we're going to buy fewer of them. So therefore the first thing that in theory happens is the trade balance should improve. The value of exports should go up and the value of imports should go down. X minus M therefore becomes more positive and therefore the trade balance improves. However, that's not guaranteed to happen. And there are many reasons for this, but a couple of reasons are, firstly, just because the price of exports goes down doesn't necessarily mean anybody's going to buy them. It might be that the price is still too high relative to low-cost producers, particularly in Asia. It might be that our main markets are in recession and they're still not buying. Likewise, just because the price of imports goes up, it doesn't mean that we're going to stop buying them. It might well be that if we're importing key raw materials or importing things like basic foodstuffs or oil, there's not really a whole heap we can do about it. Therefore, we end up buying the same quantity of imports, but at a much higher price, meaning the value, M is the value, in the equation AD, is C plus I plus C plus X minus M is the value of imports. So what happens is the value of imports goes up. So therefore, potentially, especially in the short term, a depreciation in the exchange rate could worsen your trade balance, and that's a useful discussion to be able to explain. Turning to the other policy objectives, assuming that these dire consequences don't occur, and the extent to which they will occur depends on how import dependent your economy is. But assuming that all goes well, the price of exports falls and we sell more exports and we buy fewer imports and so on, then in principle aggregate demand should rise. As a consequence of that, what we should expect to see is rising GDP, so actual growth, and at the same time we should also be expecting to see jobs being created as a result, both in the export sector and in in the export sector in firms that compete with imports, who will now look cheaper to UK consumers, and all the multiplier effects down the supply chain. So more jobs are created, more raw materials are needed, more workers have income, so they go down the pub, and so on and so forth. And lastly, in terms of key policy objectives, inflation. So this is the one which is most likely to be unfavourable for two reasons. Firstly, what we can see is that aggregate demand is rising. So therefore, if the economy is close to capacity, close to full employment, then that rising demand will mean the economy starts to run short of key factors of production, potentially key raw materials, key land, and so on, as a result of which firms' wage costs and so on will rise, forcing them to increase prices. At the same time, there's also going to be cost push pressures. in the sense that the price of lots of key imported materials like oil and so on, or if you're Sainsbury's, the price of virtually everything that you sell in your shop is higher than it was before, the cost to you. You're going to have to pass that cost on to consumers in the form of higher prices, again creating inflation. So on the one hand we've got rising demand, on the other hand we've got rising costs. So one way we can see the impact on say ADAS is, suppose we're originally in equilibrium there, there we go, with ADAS Y1 PL1. Firstly, AD shifts to the right as a result of rising exports and falling imports. Secondly, what's going to happen is that there's upward pressure on aggregate supply and taking us to AS2. So in the end, we end up with, in my diagram at least, we end up with both higher GDP and a higher price level. AS shifting vertically because of the increase in import costs, and AD shifting to the right as a result of higher export sales. So those are the macro effects. Other things being equal, it all depends, blah, 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 blah. When we turn to the micro effects, the best way of looking at these is looking at consumers, firms and workers. So from the point of view of a consumer, none of this is good news. The price of imports goes up, so therefore the price of all your food in Sainsbury's and so on goes up, so that's not good news. Even if you buy local alternatives, well, you weren't buying them before, so presumably you didn't want them, so therefore you're going to pay higher price than you used to do, or get lower quality. So from the point of view of UK consumers, broadly speaking, it's bad news. From the point of view of firms, it depends very much on who you are. So if you're a UK university, somebody like that, then it's all good news, basically. You don't really have costs of imports, so you're unaffected by that bit. And what's happening is that your fees in pounds now look much cheaper to students coming, paying in dollars and euros and so on. So more overseas students are going to want to come to the UK when the pound is weak. If, on the other hand, you're primarily an importer, then that's not going to be such good news. If you're Sainsbury's, then basically you hate this because you don't really sell very much. You haven't got exports, you're not selling abroad. But the vast bulk of what you buy is pineapples and Godolin as well. Most of this stuff is coming in from abroad, therefore your costs just went up. And that's one of the evaluative points on things like unemployment. There may well be job losses in import-dependent sectors because Sainsbury's costs have been driven up. In order to maintain their profit, somehow they're going to have to become more efficient. Efficiency generally means that the job's probably going to be lost. Or if you're in the middle, you might be somebody like BMW. You're probably an import-exporter. So some of your components are going to come from Germany. A lot of your main market is in the Eurozone, so you're affected both ways. If you're a worker, much depends on who you work for. So if you work for an exporter, then that's probably good news. Your job is secure, potential for a pay rise. If you work for an importer, then that's far less good because they're going to be looking to save money. No pay rise for you. So obviously there are kind of evaluative points to be made around